I am Dr. Ghulam Mir, President of the World Kashmir Awareness. I would like to thank you all for joining us in today's webinar. Our topic today is Women of Occupied Kashmir, Resistance and the Path to Self-Determination. I'll give a very quick overview of the situation in Kashmir. Many of you know, but for those who don't, more than half of Kashmir is in an existential crisis, with 8 million civilians in the valley being brutally crushed by 800,000 Indian armed forces. The ratio between army and civilians is 1:8. The rest of us in the rest of the world are agonizing with our brothers and sisters in Kashmir. The whole regime, the whole region is a tinderbox, regardless of the recent India-Pakistan discussions on the Azad Kashmir, occupied Kashmir border, and also the recent greetings between Prime Minister of India and Prime Minister of Pakistan. I just saw Prime Minister of Pakistan's response to Prime Minister of India, in which he, of course, as he should, thanks the Prime Minister and welcomes his sentiment, but also says Kashmir is of critical importance. So you can see Kashmir will not be solved. Issue will never be resolved unless and until Kashmir comes to the front and center of any discussion between India and Pakistan. Otherwise, it will be irrelevant in resolving the crisis. We are asking the people of conscience around the world to watch, listen, read, and pay heed to Kashmiris under Modi's Hindutva since August 5, 2019 in particular. Kashmiris are tired of the UN and big powers in action, but they still have a glimmer of hope in the ordinary humanity like you and I. So people need to rise and help us against the tyranny of the so-called largest democracy. In Kashmir, India is not a democracy. It's a full-fledged settler colonialism. Why do we have this webinar with this title? As you all know, March is Women's History Month. American women achieved their right to vote under the 19th Amendment in 1920, after many decades of a strong and unrelenting struggle. It's only befitting that we pay tribute to those brave women who refused to back down against some odds to their enfranchisement. Today, we are recognizing the brave women of Indian occupied Kashmir who are championing a cause fundamentally different, but also more consequential to the lives of not only 8 million, but 15 million people between the occupied Kashmir and Azad Kashmir. Not only that, it is consequential to approximately 2 billion people of this South Asian region. Our women in Kashmir are championing the right to self-determination at the cost of their personal freedom of movement and freedom of expression. They are waging the struggle at the cost of their own and their loved ones' physical safety and security. Kashmir, however, is blessed with a growing number of women scholars who are intelligent, articulate, brave, and gifted. They are historians, they are anthropologists, writers, and thinkers. It comes from the bottom of my heart. This is a tremendous opportunity for Kashmiris that our scholars all around the world are speaking up, writing, and articulating for the millions of Kashmiris. Together with their brothers, they will carry the torch of light to shine our path to self determination. We are here to besiege the people of the conscience here in America and all around the world to help our people to realize the cherished goal of freedom and right of self determination. I'll give you just a few points about the World Kashmir Awareness. It was established in 2005. Our mission is to provide information on the Kashmir conflict, advocating for Kashmiris throughout the diaspora. We produce and aggregate and amplify news articles, events, and organize rallies and demonstrations. We engage in advocacy efforts with diplomatic, civil, religious, political, human rights, and advocacy organizations. Our goal is to expose human rights abuses and support the right of self-determination in Kashmir. World Kashmir Awareness Forum is honored to welcome 3 extraordinary scholars of Kashmir today to highlight the plight and the role of women in the Kashmiri society and its struggle to self-determination. Who better to speak on the role of women in Kashmir than these 3 well-accomplished scholars from and of Kashmir? It's my great honor and privilege to welcome Dr. Shagufta Ashraf, Dr. Insha Malik, and Dr. Athar Zia to the panel. To make the best use of time, I'll give a brief introduction to all 3 of these speakers. At the beginning, to make sure that I do not spend too much time in articulating their accomplishments, I'll make the discussion, the introduction very brief, and then have the speakers take it from there. Each speaker will have 10 minutes to give an overview of the speaker's work, the research and all, area of interest, and why this webinar is important to them. After their introductory remarks, the main discussion will begin. I'll pose a kickoff question to the panel to initiate the discussion. The question will be, what do women in Kashmir want from the international community, and how can we build a productive solidarity with them? The panelists will then have introductory discussion. All speakers are encouraged to raise questions among themselves and get answers. I'll first speak about Dr. Shagufta Ashraf. I met her only once, actually twice, in the webinars. Dr. Ashraf is chair and assistant professor of Banking and Finance Department and Management Sciences in the IT, University of Kotli, Azad Kashmir, Pakistan. Recently, she petitioned to the Undersecretary General of the United Nations Women, drawing attention to the plight of Kashmiri women under Indian occupation, including the half-widows, which is a typical Kashmiri term which is very specific to Kashmir, really. She's an author of Making the Best of It. She's also a co-author on the cultural mix of OBOR, that is countries that are working with CPAC. She is in very vocal supporter of Kashmiri men, Kashmiri women, and also children. Dr. Insha Malik is assistant professor of political theory and international relations at Kardan University in Kabul. She was a visiting professor, visiting scholar at the WashU. She is a political theorist and gender studies scholar, advocate of women's political agency and demilitarization of Jammu and Kashmir. She's also author of Muslim Women Agency and Resistance Politics. And last but not the least, the person I have gotten to know better. And I won't say too much because then I'll waste more time. Dr. Athar Zia. She is an assistant professor of anthropology and gender studies at the University of Northern Colorado, Greeley. She's an author, a columnist, a poet, short fiction writer, and she wrote a poem which has been published called The Frame. Author of Resisting Disappearances, Military Occupation and Women's Activism in Kashmir. She is written in Huffington Post, Al Jazeera, Outlook, and Global Issues. With that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Shagufta Ashraf, and the three of them will interact and will watch. Dr. Shagufta Ashraf.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mir, President World Kashmir Forum, for inviting me and the organizers. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. Today, the topic under discussion is very much close to the heart of every woman: right to self-determination and miseries and ignominies and plights of women of Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. The first question arises in anybody's mind that human rights violations, if human rights violations are going on in any region that is a disputed, or any kind of the status of that region is, what is the reason behind that? Why it is happening? So if you have not solid reason, then you can say that, okay, this is something maybe the shortcomings of the administration, or something routine in nature, and these are the crimes actually which take place in that particular region. But when it happens in a disputed territory, so the conscious of the world and the superpowers and the UN, or whosoever are the actors who are playing major role in the world order, should see that if it is happening, why it is happening. In case of particular Jammu and Kashmir dispute, that is a disputed territory, and I think everybody around the world knows that the India-Pakistan issue, because it's a nuclear flashpoint and it is related to the peace and security of South Asia. So there is need to understand that right to self-determination, the inalienable right of people, and under UN Charter, under different treaties, under agreements, under resolutions, if all those testimonies are available, even then, if it is happening, so what is the reason? What actually the intention of a country who is occupying that region? In particular, Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir are disputed territory, and it is recognized also by UN. So then what is the reason why UN and the superpowers are not able to give, the demands of the people of Indian occupied Kashmir, the right which is their birthright. So if we just go into the little details of this very much right to self-determination, which is called, we can see that the establishment of United Nations at the end of World War II was the most noble and extraordinary act undertaken by the global leadership to avoid another catastrophic world order. The Charter of UNO was further distinguished with the inclusion of an exceptional humanitarian clause that was the right to self determination, which was unique in its nature and can be attributed to divinity. Ever since the decolonization of the subcontinent in 1947, the people of Jammu and Kashmir are demanding the right to self determination. Kashmiri traced back this prized right from the resolutions of United Nations, which were derivative of it, got accredited from the charter of this world body. Owing to its paramount significance, the right of self-determination was secured in Article 1 of the UN Charter with a universal application, where Kashmiris cannot be made as an exception. The global decolonization started immediately after establishment of UN in 1945, owed a lot to the right of self-determination. Right to self-determination is the legal right of people for deciding their future destination. It is the essence of international law, arising from customary international law secured in a number of international treaties and agreements. Kashmiri's right to self determination is also secured in numerous UN resolutions, treaties, and commitments, even of Indian leadership. In the light of UN mandated right to self determination, the people of Jammu and Kashmir too had a right to determine their own destiny, their own political status, and their own economic, cultural, and social development model. United Nations Commission for India and Pakistan UNCIP, through its resolution of January 5, 1949, guaranteed a free and fair plebiscite in Jammu and Kashmir with the sole objective of granting the people of Jammu and Kashmir their right to self-determination. This is the inalienable right the people of Jammu and Kashmir had in 1947, and it is valid today in 2021. The only obstacle in the exercise of this right is Indian obduracy, which has constantly caused a barrier since the passage of UNCIP resolution on 5 January 1949. Since its establishment in 1945, the UN ensured grant of this right to over 100 states. This is clear from UN membership. It had 51 countries as its members in October 1945, and today in 2021, there are 193 countries form the member states of this international organization. In all the cases, the right of self-determination formed the basis of such large international community. The only question people of Jammu and Kashmir ask today from UN and of course 193 member states, that after all, why they have been deprived from this alienable right to self-determination enshrined in UN Charter and UN resolutions. This is the sole question which each and every Kashmiri wants to ask from UN, from major superpowers and 193 member states. Large-scale usage of violence in Jammu and Kashmir has been a persistent and a dominant feature of India's imperial state policy to crush Kashmiri's voice to get their inalienable right to self-determination. Particularly, sexual violence being leveraged as a weapon of war by the Indian forces in the region that has been grossly overlooked at the international level, despite growing awareness of an urgent need to empower women in the conflict hit area of Jammu and Kashmir, where prolonged Indian military occupation, massive troops build up, and sprawling military camps stretched across cities, towns, and villages had created a fertile ground of violence against women. Being a vulnerable part of the society, the Kashmiri women have been the worst victim of this long drawn, unresolved dispute that has been left behind a horrid legacy in the person of rape victims, widows, and half widows. The continued conflict, bloodshed, and violence have shattered the lives of women, so much so that today 36% of women suffer anxiety or disorders in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. Caught in a whirlwind of violence, the uncertainty, life of Kashmiri women as a mother, as a daughter, as a sister, as a wife has been adversely affected during the years of turmoil. Many of them have been widowed, displaced, molested, gang raped, and even brutally tortured, harassed, and humiliated in jails and interrogation centers. Besides bearing the brunt of violence, a good majority of Kashmiri women have lost their kith and kin during the ongoing conflict. According to the figures, more than 100,000 people have been killed in the violence. It has also been estimated that around 25,000 women have lost their partners only. Rape, the outrage of modesty, and other forms of violence against women has been one of the deadly aspect. Women has been one of the deadly aspect of the protracted conflict that has inexpressibly shattered the lives of the women living under a constant threat of rape and sexual assault from Indian Army, Conan and Pushpura gang rape in 1991, Shopian, Asia and Nilofer rape and then murder, Asifa Bano's rape and murder are few examples on record and serves as the most shocking, nightmarish ordeal of the Kashmiri women. Other than if I just go into the figures, we can say that various studies I will quote later on the figures and stats what kind of women of Indian occupied Kashmir are suffering through either that is a physical level or the mental level. I will later on discuss that. But let's come towards this 600 days long military clampdown and information blockade. What is the impact of this on particular physical health and mental health of the women? 600 days long military clampdown and information blockade imposed on Kashmir by the government of India on 5th August 2019 has further added to the miseries of Kashmiri women. According to a study published by Imhan and Action Aid, there is an alarming increase in levels of mental health disorders in population of Kashmir. 11.3% of the respondents in the population of Kashmir are suffering from mental health disorders. 50% of women and 37% of men suffers from depression. 36% has anxiety disorders and 22% suffers from a post-traumatic stress disorder. A team of 5 women who visited Kashmir soon after this Indian government stripped off Jammu and Kashmir of its special status narrated a spine-chilling account of horrible situation of women in Jammu and Kashmir in a report titled Women's Voice. And an irony of Kashmiri half widows is yet another example and highly disconcerting aspect of this conflict has given rise to the category of women known as half widows and whose number has swelled to thousands. Over 11,000 Kashmiri women have been molested or gang raped, 23,000 widows, 1 lakh and 7,805 children have been rendered orphans since 1989. Even then, these brave women of Indian occupied Kashmir continue to challenge the Indian illegally occupation with courage and determination to get their right to self-determination. There is a need that UN should revisit seriously its role over the future status of Jammu and Kashmir and give Kashmiris their right as granted in its charter and resolution. The international community, major powers, have to reawaken their conscience, as Mr. Mir said. India should stop human rights violation and inspect UN Charter for peaceful settlement of Jammu and Kashmir conflict under the framework of UN resolutions. Kashmir belongs to Kashmiris, and India should stop harping on its misleading slogan of calling it its integral part. This is what all just my insights of what is the title of today's discussion and what is my take on this particular subject. I would be happy to get the questions of my co-panel or from anywhere. I'm available to answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Ashraf. May I request Dr. Malik to take the stage, please? Dr. Malik.
Thank you so much for this opportunity, and thank you so much, Dr. Shagufta. I think you fairly covered a lot of long, long record of human rights violations that we've been hearing and dealing with. I'd like to interject from the point of view of a scholar or a political theorist, how I understand the presentation or representation of Kashmiri women, and therefore they're using sort of them as a plug to get attention on what is happening in Kashmir. And perhaps please understand me from the fact that I grew up in Indian occupied Kashmir, and my experience of Kashmir comes from both my lived experience as well as then going and talking to people through the interviews that I've conducted in my research. But also what I have inherited as an inheritance from my mother's aunt, aunt's grandmother, and the legacy of what it means to be a Kashmiri woman, I guess, is best represented in the very fact that Kashmiri society is a matriarchal society and has long been so, where women relatively, I mean, if you compare it to the mainland India or mainland Pakistan, or you compare it to Afghanistan, for instance, women had relatively much more autonomy and more power in terms of their social and public role. But amidst the insurgency that started in 1989, and of course, it didn't start right then, Kashmiri right to self-determination and its struggle goes back several decades, I think several hundred years. If we go back to 1850, that's when you had the first organized labor movement of Kashmiris, which is called the Shalbaf movement, where Kashmiris rose up and challenged the Dogra rule and used the modern conceptions of self-determination or conceptions of resisting an illegal rule in a proper sense, in the historical sense. And then you saw that furthermore with the anti-colonial movements that started in the region against the British, Kashmiris were much more inclined to create a more local and indigenous demand called the Mulki demand, to ask for a Kashmiri nation or nationalist representation. So within those struggles, I think women have played active roles from the beginning. And my grandmother being one such woman who participated in all of these early movements as a widow, raising 3 or 4 children of her own, and at the same time participating in the political movements that shaped what a Kashmiri society is. And more so, Kashmir's complex national identity, I guess, of having relatively more power or more equitable gender relations between men and women, having more egalitarian prospects after 1947 as well, when feudalism was ended and a mass education drive enabled people to, especially Kashmiri Muslims, to gain education. It allowed for women to emerge as natural leaders, even if they were, let's say, illiterate in the colonial educational terms. They were politicized from much, much early on. So I guess apart from the victimization that we have seen of Kashmiri women from 1989, Kashmiri women have also stood out for the role they have played as agents within different political demands, whether it is demands for demilitarization or demands for political freedom, or demands for proper access or connection between 2 sides of Kashmir, which has been denied to them since 1989, especially of women living along the line of control. So you see, women have taken proactive roles, and of course, pushing the Western world's understanding of Muslim women as somehow a category of perennially oppressed women. So to give you an example, when I did my research in Kunanposhpura, I met a woman And when I asked her about, the rapes and the situation over there, one of the women said, gave me a very powerful anecdote. And she said, yes, we were raped, but it's not a matter of shame for us, because if men are raped or if men are killed, it's only because of their politics. And if it happens to us, it doesn't happen only because we're women. It also happens because we are Kashmiri women demanding freedom of our land. So having said that, they kind of re-articulate or challenge the narratives of honor and shame as were, part and parcel of the traditional society or traditional landscape in which we think about women as obviously just oppressed because they were raped. But what I found through my research, and of course through my lived experience as well, is that these women did not internalize that victimhood, and they were even ready to put themselves on the line repeatedly because they realized that their demand for freedom is a just one, and it has to be heard and it has to be actualized. Um, with what is happening and what is being percolated, in Kashmir, and despite that, we see a lot of women leaders emerging in Kashmir. It only points to the fact that a lot of us are trained, through our tradition, through our culture, to look at women as somehow the weaker, or look at them as in need of protection. But what the research shows actually is the opposite. It shows that because of the detraditionalization, women have grown stronger. And not only that, but they have also become much more political, and they have become much more vocal about what needs to happen in Kashmir, or in terms of its possible political destiny. And they also challenge us in terms of how we think about agency in the feminist theory, if I could say. Like, we think women are only powerful if they challenge, their own community or their own culture or Islam, for instance. And after 9/11 in the West, what we have seen is much more need for such an agency to be depicted. Like, Muslim women are seen only powerful when they challenge Islam or patriarchy within Islam. They're not seen powerful if they deal with a multi-layered reality such as in Kashmir. I think Athar will speak a lot to that. For instance, how it is to live within a society where de-traditionalization is brought about by a sudden and violent militarization of social and cultural fabrics. So I think I think we have a narrative in place, but I think this narrative is falling short in terms of how we ourselves understand our own political action if there is no audience. Like, for instance, if there is no UN sitting there and offering us freedom, how do we actually look at ourselves? Do we think we are victims, or do we think we are agents? And I think Kashmiri women that I interviewed and that I sought to write about in my book challenged this very notion for me, because they didn't present themselves as victim, even though they have been undergoing a lot of victimizing circumstances that we could only imagine somebody go through. And of course, they're all true. And then despite that, they have presented themselves as agents who have the right to speak for Kashmir and represent Kashmir issue to the world. Having said all of this, I think it would be good to also, for all of us here to kind of reimagine what does it mean today for us to represent Kashmiri women if we're representing them to the world, or if we're presenting Kashmir issue to the world. What are we as Kashmiris or as scholars, what are we lacking, or what are the limitations in which we have explored fully the complexity of Kashmiri society? And have we rather tried to simplify it and make it much, much simple for the world to understand? Because this is not, it's not a village, it's a whole country with a lot of diversity and complexity within women's political action as well. And how have we chosen to represent that to ourselves and to the world? I think it would be, it would be a good thing to start having a conversation about that. And I would ask Athar to really pitch in on that. perhaps will help.
Thank you so much. We'll ask Dr. Atharzia to start.
So we have 10 minutes to speak. Do we have 10 minutes or is that the time assigned? Dr. Mir?
I can't hear you too well. I don't know what the problem is, but go ahead.
I was just asking if you have 10 minutes. Is everyone able to hear me?
Well, go ahead.
That is correct. You have 10
Yeah.
minutes, Dr. Zia.
Yes, we can hear you, Atul.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Mir. Thank you, everyone who made this panel possible. And I would like to say that a lot that has already been said lays a very good and solid foundation for thinking about history of Kashmiri women. And both Dr. Shagufta and Dr. Malik, they have worked on this subject and they've written about this. And I think a lot of the work that needed to be done in laying the foundation of where Kashmiri women stand today, I think that has already been done. So I'll speak to a couple of things that I might lend insight to. First and foremost, the question that you'd asked us, Dr. Mir, like, why is this webinar important to you? I feel like this is Women's History Month, of course, as you already said. It's very, very profound and touching for me personally that right now we are 3 Kashmiri women that represent this whole, I mean, we don't represent the entire regions and all of that. And also representation is a difficult job that anyone can take up. But just to be here as Kashmiri women that have been, that have lived across divided Kashmir and who are speaking for themselves and speaking for our own selves, as well as this webinar is important to me, that I'm also trying to amplify certain voices that I feel that I hold within myself, with whom I worked in the last 20 years actively, and maybe in the last 1 decade more actively. So that's why it's important. It's important to really flag that reality that right now you have 3 different women from different parts talking about and trying to see the situation from a Kashmiri vantage. So far, what has happened to Kashmiri women, especially, is that they have been spoken for all the time. Not that they have not spoken, not that they have not written, not that they haven't tried to represent themselves, but most of the time what happens in the Indian narrative especially is that they get represented, and those representations are not the true representations of Kashmiri women on ground. And as a result, they have been presented as these passive, agency-less women to the rest of the world. And because, as Insha already mentioned, and of course Shagufta as well, that in an Islamophobic global order, post 9/11, it becomes very easy to buy such things from the Indian government as they peddle this policy. As we know, in 2019, one of the things that the Indian government used as a strawman argument was the fact that there was gender discrimination inside Kashmir. That's why they had to remove the autonomy of Kashmir. Now, I do want to flag here that removal of autonomy of Kashmir is not that big a deal for many Kashmiris, not because they don't care about their territorial sovereignty, but because the autonomy was one, nominal. It had been eviscerated long back. And the other thing was that the only thing that they were connected to was the territorial sovereignty, the domicile laws that were connected to it. So that was the most important part. But we see that as the removal was done militarily, what they did was they took the argument of gender discrimination and said, because the autonomy is bad to women. And here they were doing a couple of things. They were also presenting autonomy as this, as a framework for a patriarchal order that they already have sold to the rest of the world to as a terrorist or Islamist, and all of the stereotypical words that they use as this patriarchy that has been created within the autonomy by these Muslim men, which is discriminatory to women. And that was one of the strawman arguments used in 2019. And not a lot of, in the Indian narrative, of course, not to talk about the men, but many Indian feminists who often come to kind of like show solidarity with Kashmiri women every now and then, they didn't even talk about that. They didn't talk to that to that argument that was being peddled. And here we see a couple of things happening again. So most of the time when solidarity comes from the Indian quarters for Kashmiris, it's because they're lending solidarity to human rights violations. They talk about it in a vacuum, as if, as Shagufta earlier mentioned, that why is this human rights violation happening? No one really speaks to that political dispute. So their solidarity lasts only so long, which is not true solidarity. It's just lip service. So that kind of like becomes very meaningful for Kashmiris to engage with, that it was so easy for them to say gender discrimination and use a ruse basically to as one of the arguments to remove the autonomy. And that ruse was that Kashmiri women, if they marry non-Kashmiris, they lose their domicile status. Now they've taken the entire domicile away from Kashmiris. And what does that even mean? And the other thing is that that wasn't really necessarily true. Kashmiri women, the Indian Supreme Court as well as the Kashmiri High Court had given a ruling that women do not lose their domicile status if they marry non-Kashmiris. They retain their property rights, they retain their franchise. The only thing that was kind of vague and that needed to be decided case by case was the property rights to the heirs. And that was because of a bureaucratic red tape that wasn't being solved on time. So as a result, it was kind of languishing in a way, and from different government to different government, you don't know what these committees are doing. So that was basically bureaucratic red tape causing that particular problem. So it did not need entire state to be dismantled. But the thing that we should be engaging with here is that it became so easy for them to use the gender discrimination angle, and the rest of the world bought it very easily. And it all, the BJP government, not that BJP government is any different to Kashmiris from the quote unquote secular governments of the past, but it was an easy sell for the rest of the world. And that says a lot about the kind of undermining of Kashmiri womanhood that has happened in the last 33 years actively and in the last 72 years, especially in the Indian narrative. Because I engage with the Indian narrative, that's why I'm kind of like talking more about that. So that's something very important that we should talk about, and how to kind of like address these misrepresentations as well. And I think just by the virtue of being here and talking about this as Kashmiri women, that also signals something. That also signals a departure from other people speaking for Kashmiris, and then Kashmiris keeping quiet and listening to that. Because that's what used to happen. You know, there used to be people, there used to be quote unquote feminists who used to come to you and tell you who you are. And but I think things have changed, and Kashmiri women are speaking. And as I said earlier, as Insha mentioned her grandmother, and we have so many women to take inspiration from who have already spoken and who speak. So we're not new in that sense. That right now we are talking on this forum. So we're not doing anything new. We're not doing anything that has not been done before. This is not pioneering at all. But what we are doing is maybe speaking in a different forum. Kashmiri women have spoken. And that's what has become so, that has been invisibilized concertedly. Now, one of the things that we have to consider here is that not everything is rosy for Kashmiri women. So when we say Kashmiri women have spoken, they have their own forms of agency, which might not look like the confrontational feminism that Insha was talking about earlier. It might be their own nuanced, cultural, intersectional, transnational feminism. So that's what they represent. We do have to pay attention to the fact that after everything is said and done, Kashmir also has a social and religious patriarchy. So Kashmiri women, they find themselves at the crossroads. If we think about it, they are between Islamophobia, that is a global malaise right now. Then they have their own patriarchal and social and religious patriarchy to deal with. On the other side, they have the Indian occupation. So that's the intersection that they find themselves in. And I completely agree with Insha when she talks about Kashmiri society as a unique patriarchy, so to speak. In my work, I call it working class patriarchy, because we haven't been really rich people, especially for the last 500 years, we've technically lived in indentured slavery. So what that also means is that Kashmiri women were always, most Kashmiri women, more than 90% of women were working. So in that working class patriarchy, they could not afford to live segregated lives. They were always out in public. So how much power did that give them? How much social power did that give them? How much did the social and religious patriarchy still weigh on them? Maybe we'll talk about that. So I do want to mention that those that kind of like patriarchy does exist, and that needs to be addressed. And talking about the egalitarian part of it, I also think that it is uniquely kind of like this benevolent patriarchy. It has been. It is in the Indian narrative, when you think about Kashmiri men, they come across as these deviant terrorists, bearded, quote unquote Islamists. But the fact is that if you look at the history, especially from 47 or even before, Kashmiri men have they have kind of like been they have played a complementary. Of course, there have been challenges for Kashmiri women to come to the mainstream, but the challenges have been relatively different than what it has been in the rest of the world, and that's what I see. And this is because we are gender studies scholars and students as well, so it does come across as that. So Kashmiri society, so to speak, is not uniquely or uniquely patriarchal in that. And in the Indian narrative, it becomes an argument to say that Kashmiri men are this violent, like uniquely violent, because then the resistance becomes uniquely violent. And that is what they utilize as another argument against Kashmiri resistance, Kashmiri men and Kashmiri women. So I think those are the few points that I wanted to make. And I know that we will have question and answers and maybe take them further and then do a broader discussion. So I think that's where I'll end. It's you don't want me to drone on and on.
Thank you, Dr. Zia. It was great discussion from all three of these great speakers. I would like to ask the audience to pose any questions. But to start out, let me ask the audience, the speakers, how do we break the barrier between us Kashmiris, even when we are here or anywhere in the world, in spite of what's happening, the atrocities that are taking place against women and children and adults and everybody and men? What is it that we can do here in spite of your writing so much? Are we getting any audience in the American media and American academia? Is there anything we can do all together to encourage the American and the world audience to listen to our cries for help? So we can start with Dr. Zia, and then others can join.
Well, I think last 2 years have got us thinking a lot about solidarity and how we can engage with the rest of the world and how we already do that. And we also know that at this present moment, Kashmir has been silenced and Kashmiris have been silenced. There is this new regime, and this is a very, censorship has now been institutionalized. It's been made into a law. Early on, censorship did exist, but now it exists as a law where journalists can't speak, writers can't write. So it's in a different stage of being silenced right now. So solidarity and amplification of voices becomes very, very important. So how do we engage with the rest of the world? I know we all have ideas. We have written about it. We have written about how one of the biggest or one of the most broader slogans for this region should be decolonization, demilitarization, and facilitating the right to self-determination. But the other thing that we also, as we are talking to the rest of the world, in the last 2 years, especially the conversations that we've been having with different groups, it's very important for us to realize that Kashmir is a uniquely it's a unique opportunity for the rest of the world to exercise its creative vision. And that creative vision is that indigenous people, like Kashmiris as indigenous people, all communities, I'm not only speaking about Kashmiri Muslims, the indigenous people of Kashmiris, they have a right, they have a unique right to this determination, as Shagufta already mentioned, and she kind of laid down the history of the resolutions and how it has come to being. I feel that in this moment, it becomes uniquely important for the world to know that and realize that, because Kashmir is also an ecological disaster. I also fear that if it is allowed to go the way it's going right now, with the extractive, neoliberal, neo-colonial Indian policies, settler colonial policies that are going inside Kashmir. The reason they're removing these domicile laws, the reason they're opening up Kashmir's veins and Kashmir's rivers, is because they need these resources, from water to minerals to the land to the mountains and everything. 2 years back or 3 years back, I think there were 4 skiers who lost their lives, and no one really paid attention to, or maybe people have, I don't know, but this keeps kind of hovering in my brain, that these skiers lost their lives because they had thought that there was a trail through which they were going, but the trail had actually moved within 2 or 3 years from that glacier. So the idea is that glaciers are fast melting, and the ecological disaster that Kashmir is at the moment, you will see settler colonialism kind of, exacerbating that situation, and it already is. So my fear is that this might not be left to humans if we don't think about it in a visionary manner. The nature might take its own course, with the number of dams being built, the fault lines, and the way Kashmir is already with earthquake-prone area, and all the kind of like geological rupture it lives in. So I feel that's a point of overlap with a lot of indigenous communities who are facing the same situation, even here, from Standing Rock to peoples in Canada to people in Australia. People are realizing, people in Guam, and also thinking about Southeast Asia, thinking about South Asia as well. So there are people who are facing these situations, and people are actively talking, especially indigenous people. They're talking about their dispossession. So in that sense, we also need a different vantage, because Kashmir has long been buried into thinking about this bilateral dispute, which it is not. It's a dispute of indigenous peoples who want their right to self-determination. So I think in that sense, Kashmir has to be narrativized the way it is, and it has to be presented in the manner that it exists as an indigenous people's problem, as an ecological problem as well. And that also speaks to the neoliberal extractive the government that you have, that has brazenly taken over the mantle and pushes the settler colonialism forward. So I think there are many, many points of overlap, but these two really stand out to me. And I think there is something to be pushed in that arena, so that we can have a common conversation with the rest of the world.
Let's have Dr. Insha Malik and Dr. Shagufta Ashraf weigh in on this solidarity issue from the West and other women, even in India and other places in Pakistan and rest of the world.
I'll go first. Thank you so much, Athar. I think you've covered quite a bit of what needs to be done globally. But I would also speak to the issues that we have at hand locally, as well as in the region, in terms of we need a sort of cohesive understanding of Kashmir ourselves. I think a lot of colonial narratives have been peddled, so much so that we have internalized a lot of colonial ways of looking at ourselves. I think we need a certain kind of re-education on Kashmir's history, politics ourselves first, so that we can represent that to the world. I feel, and obviously, it's not shocking, because if you look at Indian occupied Kashmir, and I'm sure other speakers can speak about the Kashmir on the other side, there is a systematic absence of Kashmir from Kashmiri's social world. What I mean by that is that when you go to the schools, you're not taught about your history, you're taught about Indian history, or you're taught about Pakistani history. You don't learn your language. You don't learn, for instance, a lot of Kashmir's history is in Farsi language, which used to be our medieval language or resource, which means a large number of Kashmiris cannot read Farsi, therefore don't have access to their own history or the resources that can determine what they have been doing here. I mean, for instance, if we look at the question of indigenousness, I think it's important one, but it also loses its relevance to the Kashmir region, which has been a sort of a, it has been an ancient city on a trade route which has spanned for about 10,000 years, where people have always come and intermingled, and they have brought different cultures and ideologies to each other. So obviously, if I'm sitting in Afghanistan, and it might be a bit discerning to understand that it's only 500 kilometers from here, which means people have always traveled in this region to the point that there have been alternative ideas and histories that have, which is not to say that this is the only history or the Central Asian connection of Kashmir is the only worthwhile history that we should talk about. But I think that is one of the histories that is consistently under challenge from both Indian and Pakistani establishment, in terms of that Kashmiris are somehow becoming generations of confused people. Like, okay, what are we? Because of this contest of whether they should call themselves Indian, or they should call themselves Pakistani, or they should call themselves with some other category. So because such a complexity has been brought about into the social political culture of Kashmir, it's very difficult then to represent this problem from the very core point. And in addition to that, may I add that we also are a community, or we also are a set of communities and peoples from whom we have completely, removed the access to scholarship. Like, even though Kashmiris are educated, it's very difficult for them to have the kind of scholarship that is relevant to their existence, right? If you are in Kashmir right now and you want to go to University of Kashmir and study history, you probably will never be able to study what you're really interested in as a Kashmiri. So even access to scholarship, which is missing, right? So I feel, for myself as a scholar, I see myself at a sort of intersection between the two worlds, which is our collective role is both ways. It is facing the Kashmiri people, and it's also facing the West, which means we need to bring the awareness of the world to Kashmiri people so that they can determine how well to fight this war, which has been imposed on them, I would say, and then at the same time look towards movements and possibilities within which we can, join our voices and speak about a sort of decoloniality that can create a better world. And I don't mean that only for Kashmiris, but for a large number of people in this region, whether they are Dalits in India, whether they are Pasmandas in Pakistan, or whether they are Afghans who are facing brutal war. I think Kashmiris have to bear the torch to start a decolonization movement, or to create a possibility for an alternative narrative in which people of this region can find their voices and bring it together. I think that would really add a force to the universal movement for better rights for people everywhere. I think that's how I see it.
Dr. Ashraf, thank you so much. Well done.
Yes, Dr. Mir, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
You're well.
Okay. Last but not the least, I was listening to all the narratives and all the solutions, and the way forward to right to self-determination. All are really important, but according to my point of view, I think we Kashmiris should keep this issue very simple, to let world understand that what actually the basic nature of this dispute. As Dr. Athar very said rightly, that 2019 narrative of India was different, that it's kind of gender discrimination and so on. These type of tactics India definitely will have been using and will use in future more, because 3 generations have suffered so far in Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir for demanding their right to self-determination, and they are not getting their right. So in that particular situation, what I feel and what I think is important is to give awareness not only to our generations but also to the external world and international community. I must say that what is actually the nature of this dispute. Very simple, just two words, because whenever we discuss and debate at international fora, they ask, I mean, people who do not know about this dispute, they say that there is a lot of confusion in understanding the nature of dispute. Some says that it's bilateral, some says it's a uni, some says it's is it a multilateral issue. Then we need to explain them that the issue is very, very, very simple, in a sense that we have the right to self-determination enshrined in UN Charter on Jammu and Kashmir, and we want that UN, who promised us to grant us the right to self-determination, should intervene to settle this dispute peacefully. Let's say, for example, for a moment we say that, okay, there are some kind of other issues like patriarchy or something like, then definitely India would be successful in creating some sort of confusion between this indigenous population of Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir, that no, it's not right to self determination, it is something different. So my point of view is, we should stay firm, we should be on one page and unite that this is what the basic issue. I mean, for people of Jammu and Kashmir, the rights starts from right to self determination and ends at right to self determination. I mean, we need nothing less than right to self determination. After getting this right to self determination, we will decide whatever we have to do. Either we have, I mean, the gender issues and all that, of course they are also important, but for me and what I believe is, the right to self determination is basically the right to live. For me, I mean, if you don't have the right to live, then what else kind of right you would ask somebody to give? So if you don't have the right to live, I mean, ecological and of course all other issues would stay aside. So the first thing, we should communicate, we should give awareness, we should rise up with that, we demand right to self determination and we need it. I mean, we are very close to get this right to self determination because of, I mean, we say that international community and UN is not doing that much good. Of course, I agree. But if we say that glass is half full, we can say that a lot has been done. We have legal testimonies. We have, entire almost international community sports when we say that these are the legal testimonies, these are the reports by UN, these are the reports of the different parliaments of the world. They listen that yes, there is a concreteness, there is this is what, not something a political kind of stunt or something. This is the basic issue and this is the dispute. And when, I mean, it's my point on that, if we would correlate these things with peace and security, like peace and security of South Asia, two nuclear powers, India and Pakistan, Kashmir is the flashpoint. If we would use this model and formula, that this why it is important for world to get involved and peace make peaceful settlement of this issue, they would definitely listen to us. And world uh, is 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 almost they it has understood that what is the need of this. That is why you would see that different parliaments, EU and UK and even UN, and published two reports on Jammu and Kashmir, and in which, I mean, the High Commissioner for Human Rights clearly mentioned all these areas, human rights violations, very blatantly, that this is what happening in Indian occupied Kashmir, and they pointed out very openly. So what I feel at the moment is the need of the time, that we have to give education, we have to amplify the real nature, that no other issue. It's just the right to self-determination issue, and we have to get it. You just come forward and support this people of Indian occupied Kashmir. It's an indigenous movement. We are not terrorists. We are just demanding our right to self-determination. Women, men, children, all are unite on this one particular point. I think this is how we can achieve our goal.
Thank you, Dr. Ashraf. There's a question from audience from person is overseas. He's asking why there are women who are behind bars. And he mentions Asia Andrabi, Nahida Nasreen, and Fahmida Sofi. Why are our sisters, our scholars outside not able to speak for them and raise voices so that the world can weigh in against the Indian forces and the Indian regime that is holding these innocent people for political crimes, quote unquote. Whoever wants to start.
So does the question mean that why aren't we speaking? Is that the question?
The question, yeah. It's a Kashmiri student who is asking that question.
Oh, okay. So I would like to I would like to say that I think both Insha and I have written quite a bit about Asya Ji and women who have been incarcerated. It might not have been a fully titled paper like Women Incarcerated, because there are a few highlighted cases, but of course there's very recent. I think Nasima Bano was also incarcerated after she was, in that photograph, she was holding her son's gun, and all of that has happened. So we have in fact written, the books that Insha or I have, the book we have written in the past 2 years, I think we have mentioned, and there is articles as well. So it might be, maybe you're talking about a certain campaign. Yes, I think there should be campaigns, but I do want to say that there are several articles or people who have commented on work that I do, or even Insha does, or people who are writing about Kashmir and talking about women there. So whenever I have talked about Asya Andrabi's work, they have kind of collated my work and Asya's work and said, this is mostly from the Hindutva groups, or groups that are sometimes they're troll-like groups. Sometimes they sound as if they do some reading here and there. But I think because what has happened in the past 10 years concertedly, India really, they're also concerted here in the US. And whenever something is being written about women who are incarcerated, we also have to remember that Kashmiri resistance movement has been cast in this frame of quote unquote terrorism, although that is not United States official position. But of course, there's a lot of people who are speaking on the media and social media and here and there. So those obfuscations do happen. But if this particular student who's asking this question, if they do Google, we have written about this. And in one place, they distinctly mention that my work is kind of like extolling these people who are quote unquote terrorists. So that level of connection has been made by other people, just because we are trying to understand Asya's work and make the world understand that what she's doing is actually a revolutionary, whether we agree politically or not. But that's her own way of doing things, and that's her own way of doing her political resistance. And so I think there is considerable work that has been done, but I agree more needs to be done, and there has to be concerted work around women resistance leaders. And I think that's something we should. It's humbling to think that there is so much work that is still to be done, and I would think that inshallah at some point, as we move along, as different projects are being wrapped up, so we will think more about that. So thanks for bringing that to light. But there is some work that both Insha and I have already done in that regard.
And do you think, and then Insha and Shagufta can also answer to that. They are incremental. For example, there's one extreme is Asi Andrabi. The other extreme was the people that are for Kashmir and they pay them to speak for India.
Mhm.
And when there are those in between, such as Mahbooba Mufti, who was, at the door of India all the time with a bowl. Now,
I don't think Mehbooba Mufti is on that spectrum at all, and I won't call Asya and Rabi an extreme.
yes,
It's just
no, I'm talking of the favoriteness with India. And yesterday, Mahbooba Mufti got denied passport.
yes, she
So
got
that's
it.
the thing. It depends on where you fall in their spectrum. She is not even tolerable enough to be able to go outside and speak to the world community. And do you want to say anything about Insha or Shagufta?
I just wanted to first respond to the question about Asya and Rabi. I think in my book, I've dedicated an entire chapter to Tukhtaran and Millat as a group, how they emerged, what they did. And of course, I don't personally agree with a lot of their politics, but I tried to understand in what conditions and under what vacuum they emerged and what were their successes and what they've been able to do. In general, unfortunately, in Kashmir, political prisoners have been the most unfortunate group of people. We have people jailed as far as in Kanyakumari in India, which is all the way on the other side. We don't have proper protocols in terms of, or databases of people who have been incarcerated for no real reason. We have almost 8 Kashmiris who were incarcerated for the JNU sedition case alone. So one can imagine the extent and the number of Kashmiris that are incarcerated in Kashmir and also outside of Kashmir in India. And then there's no mechanism, because unfortunately Kashmiri society is a very on the moment kind of society. We remember everything for a few minutes and then we kind of, our memory of what happens is quite short-lived and we move on. So we have not been able to track or create databases, except for, I remember Anjum Zamruda Habib, who had started a political prisoners organization, and she was able to collect something, but it was a huge tussle to even, have a conversation about political prisoners. And then, of course, if we talk about specifically about women prisoners, and we have, Anjum Zamruda Habib, who's been for 5 years, she was in Tihar jail, and then we have Farida Penji, who was also incarcerated outside of Kashmir. And then, of course, we have activists and women from Dukhtar Millat who are incarcerated and under very, very difficult and trying times. The issue here is that as a society, not just as scholars, but I think as a society, we have failed on this one particular issue to really capitalize it, to have a kind of database that can be globally, that where we could actually go outside and fight for these cases legally and put pressure on India, because this hasn't happened, because these incarcerations are almost, not almost, but they are entirely legal as well because of the kind of draconian colonial era laws that are in place. So I know that little has been done, but a lot more needs to be done for the political and civil freedoms of Kashmiri women activists as well as people in general.
Thank you. Shagufta, I was going to hold you for another question then, but in between came a question which is interesting, and you'll probably see Dr. Athar Zia speaking about it. The question is, why is Indian diaspora like Hindu American Foundation overwhelming the narrative on Kashmir rather than Kashmiris or even Pakistani media? Where do we lack? And then after Athar, Shagufta could weigh in on that.
Oh, so you want me to speak first?
Yeah, because you're here, so you have you're in the middle of United States here.
Oh yeah,
They-
that's
they
what I was
say-
talking about earlier when Shagufta was talking about solidarity and the way you presented. I was talking solidarity building here per se, which is why I brought in the environmental issues and all of that, because to them, right to self, you tell them that this is my innate, because the first human right is the right to self-determination. And if you tell them that I need my right to self-determination, they don't really understand that. They're like, there has to be a conversation builder between the two. So that's why the world understands nuclear flashpoint. But again, it doesn't really bother them, but what bothers them is when you talk about common goals and things that they're also doing. And so when I was talking about my advantage of solidarity building for the last 2 years, I think in our work that we've done in the last 15 years, one of the obfuscations that we've tried to really do away with is telling the world that this is about Kashmiri people. It's not a bilateral dispute. It's not a border dispute. It's a dispute of the people. So once you get past that, then you actually have to create different solidarities if you're dealing with people who don't really know the region, don't really care about the region. So then, and indigenous peoples all across the world right now, they are doing this thinking because there's this decolonial thrust on thinking and rethinking regions. So now, so the question, Dr. Mir, can you repeat the question a little?
Question is, why is Hindu American Foundation in the United States overwhelming the narrative of Kashmiris?
I think I think there's a simple answer to that. They're just more people. They're just more people, but they're not that powerful because they might be more. They might be
Yes.
they're targeting everyone here. And when I talked about Asya ji earlier, they're making connections between like these. There's article out there which talks about a couple of movements, then talks about a couple of scholars, and kind of obfuscating everyone's work. I would say that they're simply more, they're concerted. And now we've come to know that for the last 15 years, they've been actually framing Pakistan as well. That the whole network of those platforms, those fake news platforms that came to light. So they're simply more concerted. But that doesn't mean that they can obfuscate something that is shining like any true thing, which is the Kashmiri resistance movement. And I think we do get heard in places where it matters, where people who are doing critical thinking about this particular historical moment in the current world order. So we do get heard in those places, and I would say there's simply more people, and they're also brainwashed people. They're completely brainwashed. They are, someone uses the word saffron washed currently, but I won't really take saffron there because saffron is so dear to us. I would say they're orange washed at this present moment. But the thing is that they're orange washed, they're brainwashed, and they also believe in their own myth. They want to create a continuity of India for the last 5,000 years as if nothing else existed. But they have so many problems, and all of, Americans are getting educated in different indigenous struggles. I won't only say that in Kashmiri struggle, but they're also getting educated in their own settler colonialism, because America is about settler colonialism. So I often say that I came from Kashmir here to think about, to write and to do, but then I felt like I stepped into someone else's nightmare here. So Americans are getting educated in that fact as well, like looking beyond the democracy and American dream and thinking about settler colonialism here. So the world is listening to that. And I think those are the things which we have to build. So they will keep speaking, they will keep trolling, whether that might be trolling or more than trolling or more concerted. And we know that it's going to happen. But we do not have to get daunted, because I think we have a true thing to say. We are on the right side of history. We have so many things to pass through. There are so many obfuscations. There's Islamophobia. Like when we think about our own positionality, we are Muslim women, brown women, Kashmiri women. But then I also like to think, when I'm thinking about Women's History Month, women do not exist in a vacuum. So Kashmiri struggle, when we think about the gendered struggle, often I'm asked this question, and I'm sure Insha and Shagufta too, like, what about Kashmiri women? I often tell people, like, when Kashmiri women are protesting disappearances as women, but they're also protesting disappearances of men. So the struggle is not only about women, it's or women's struggle, it's a men, women, and struggle of other genders. So that's a conversation that we should be having, and thinking about here in America, and thinking about why the kind of narrative that India peddles, I think it is not able to sell it anymore as much. But of course, global powers right now favor neoliberal economies, neo-colonial economies, and India in that is in its own web. It's so caught, and it is in a tough spot. We might not think it's a tough spot for it because we kind of think in different terms and think about power and population and geographical area and all of that. But I don't think the world belongs to such big behemoth contraptions of a country. It belongs to a more visionary federations. So in that, my hope is that even if there are a lot of people and they are ready to do what they're doing, it might not work for the longest possible time. And we have to keep working at making our narrative stronger.
Thank you so much. Now
Yes, Dr. Beer.
we'll
Yeah.
start with you, and then we'll have parting thoughts from each one of you. But you start, and then we'll ask.
Okay. Yes, Mr. Mir. Dr. Athar, I was just quoting in the reference that I, as a Kashmiri woman who does not have the freedom to go out for school, for college, and even inside my house, I'm not secure. So for me, the rescue is survival struggle, and to get secure from rape, from molestation, from gang rape. So I was not actually discussing with you that this is what how it is. You are right at your end. I was just giving my input that what actually we need to do when we are interacting with the world, because we need to tell them that if I would stay alive, then I would go for the development processes, then I would go for the development of country. If I won't get alive, then rest of the things for me, I mean for the environment, for ecology, for rivers, mountains, everything would be useless. So my point was just to give the information that it's when you are discussing and debating with the international community, just keep one thing very simple, that I want to live, and this is what my basic right to decide my future, what actually I want. Then the next step and the third step, and I was just discussing in that context. Number one. Number two, the question of a viewer, that why it is so. The answer is very simple. If you just go and read Indian Chronicles, a report by our organization of Germany, in which they exposed the network of India, how they buy and they sell people, they use organizations, how they lobby, how they create networks for the false propagation of this particular Jammu and Kashmir dispute. All the evidences are there, everything is there why they are doing so. So Indian Chronicle is the report, recent report. If anybody who wants to know that why India is able to do so, answer is here. And of course your answer was very, very right, that they are more in number. So these two, and of course the third one is in the same context, that why we are not able to do so, how Kashmiris can do it. 2G network is there, and in 1 year 600 and 700 to 1000 virtual curfews and internet blockade. No information can come out from that place, so how would they represent from there? So this particular webinar is important, because we are the voices of the voiceless. We people who especially women, who are actually able to interact with the world should, definitely, it's not that much which needs to be done, but at least through these kind of seminars, webinars, discussions, at least we are promoting and highlighting the issues being faced by the Kashmiri women because of the virtual curfew 600 days, this particular lockdown. And we have been watching and experiencing these kinds of crackdowns and everything for years and years, even decades. So this is the reason that maybe, and definitely you are right in your narrative that if just one lady from Indian occupied Kashmir would come out, or of course Kashmiri, even from the diaspora, no issue. If she will get up and speak, people would definitely come to listen her. They will definitely come to show solidarity with that one, and that one girl or lady would be much, much more than maybe thousands and thousands of paid workers. So this is what the situation, and I think one woman is equal to maybe 1,000 or 100,000 paid workers. So my intake on the subject. Thank you
so much. We got 30 seconds a speaker to answer this question, and that will probably close your message to the community here in America and elsewhere in the world. What's the best way to help? And you can say 30 seconds each, and then I think we'll go over 2 o'clock by a few seconds. And let's start with Insha.
I would recommend the same thing that I've been doing all my life, which is proper education on Kashmir's history, politics, geography, and what has happened there for this long. It's necessary because if we don't have enough information, we end up playing politics that isn't really beneficial for us, in the sense that it further takes away our sense of self-esteem and degrade us, in a way that we keep asking others to, simply help us, while we are the ones who should help ourselves. So I think that if we, as scholars, as activists, our role first is primarily to educate people on what is happening in Kashmir, not primarily what is happening to women, but what has happened to the region in terms of historically, and why self-determination and its denial is the essential, as rightly Dr. Shagufta mentioned, is essential to mention why that is important and how that is interconnected with so many other smaller and bigger struggles that Kashmiri people have as a nation. So it's not only the struggle, to have a nationhood, but to have a nation which is really worth, something, which has the progressive vision that can ensure prosperity for all ethnic communities, all religious communities, all people of all genders. And that's the vision for which I think any Kashmiri, will subscribe, because that is what makes us Kashmiri people different from anyone else in the region. So yeah, I would reiterate our historical existence as a part of coexistent ethics that we always have had, and our commitment to the vision and progress of the region.
Okay, 15 seconds to Dr. Ashraf, and then we'll close with the doctor.
Okay. My message is for all those international organizations and superpowers and activists and independent rights organization. Try to get visa for Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir to document human rights violations going on there, and see by yourself what Indian government do with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Athar.
I think everything has been said. I would just I would say that one, keep amplifying Kashmiri voices, and the Kashmiri resistance movement is not terrorism. Engage with that and know why Kashmiris are saying that. And the other thing that I would also ask the international community to pay attention to is that India is not yoga. India is not just ahimsa or whatever that they have been able to peddle to the world for the last 72 years, but it's a neo-colonial, neo-imperial fascist power on the rise. And that's what they have been for Kashmiris since 1947. And Kashmiri problem is not a dispute between India and Pakistan. It's not a 1947 problem, but these Kashmiris have been, the entire region has been asking for right to self-determination and whatever form of proto-democracy, even before 1947, before India and Pakistan became two nations. So historically engage with Kashmir. We continue educating and amplifying Kashmiri voices, basically. Thank you.
But with that, there is nothing I could say that would be anywhere close to the quality of presentations you have made. With that, I would like to thank you so very much and thank the audience. It'll be on Facebook. So those who are you who have not been able to join us, please log on Facebook. And with that, thank you all. God bless. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you very much. Walaikum assalam. Allah Hafiz,
Take care, everyone. Allah Hafiz.
everyone.